Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the new Meze Audio 105 AER. This is Meze's latest open back dynamic driver headphone that has quite a bit in common with their last open back dynamic driver headphone, which was the 109 Pro. That came out a couple of years ago at a price point of $800, I believe. And here with the 105 Pro, it's kind of like a budget version of that, coming in at just 400 bucks. And well, for the past month or so, I've had this headphone on hand. I've been listening to it, comparing it with some other headphones around its price range, and I'm ready to let you know what I think about it. So maybe just to kind of set the stage, with the 109 Pro, if you recall my review of that one a couple of years ago, I found that headphone to be gorgeous, but a little bit on the bright and exciting side, a little bit too bright for me. So I'm kind of curious to see, does the 105 actually improve on that? And that's what we'll talk about. So before we get into this, a quick shout out to Meze Audio for sending in this headphone for review. If you want to check out the 105 AER, any of their other headphones, I've got them linked in the description down below. But with that out of the way, let us dive to the table. We'll talk about the physical form factor, what you get inside the packaging of the 105. And then we'll talk about fit and comfort, all that good stuff. Then we'll get into talking about the sound signature, what it sounds like on my head, and get into a couple of direct comparisons with some other headphones at this price that I think you should probably be also shopping for if you're considering this headphone. Okay, with that out of the way, anything I want to talk about? Let's talk about the accessories first. All right, I'll move the headphone out. It's still here, I promise. But we're just going to take a look briefly at the box. Here's your box. It's got kind of this cool like turtle shell motif looking up here. It's just their different aesthetic that they've got on this headphone versus the 109. Inside that box, you get a very nice carry case. Meze Audio always does like just some of the best carry cases. Apologies for the zipper noise, but you can see it's zippered, it's semi-hard shell. And you know, it's just kind of like the perfect size. In fact, here, let me throw the headphone in it. Perfect size for this headphone. I guess if I had any complaint about it, is that like most cases, frankly, you can't leave the cable on the headphone when you put it in there. And while I don't have a cable on the headphone at the moment, just as a heads up, if you're not totally clear on this, this is a cabled headphone. It is not a wireless Bluetooth headphone. And I guess on that topic, let's talk about the cable, the stock cable that comes with the 105 AER, which is a pretty decent cable. You know, in terms of headphone cables, it's certainly not the worst, but probably also not my favorite. It's like a dual entry 3.5 millimeter. So that's what you'll have going into the bottom of the headphone. And then on the other end, I've got a standard single 3.5 millimeter termination. Lengthwise, this is a little bit on the long side. Well, okay, that's actually, depends on where you're coming from. A lot of desktop headphones will come with like 6 foot, 8 foot, 10 foot cables. And this is definitely not quite that long. I would guess that this is probably like a 5 foot, maybe a 6 foot long cable. So it's a little bit longer than like my typical IEM cables, but I would say this is a decent little compromise between the typical longer desktop cable and the shorter portable cable. I didn't really have any issues with this length. Let me step back a little bit and say, with longer cable headphones, a lot of the times I will find myself just feeling the need to use a cable tie on them and shorten them. This length, I didn't have that issue, but it is a little bit on the longer side. Apart from that, I guess I'll highlight briefly that it does have kind of a cotton cover down at the bottom, and then at the Y split, it splits into a silicone jacketed cable. And that's usually a good balance, because I kind of like the feel of these cotton or just these nylon wrapped bottom cables, but a lot of times you'll have issues with microphonics where if this cable rubs up against a jacket or a shirt or something like that, sometimes that rubbing noise can get transmitted into your ear. But usually that happens above the Y split and not below. So when they go with this kind of like compromise where you've got silicone down below, usually don't have that issue. And it was not a thing that stood out to me as I was using the AER. So I guess from that perspective, good job. The only complaints I really have with this cable is just that it's a little bit on the stiff side, a little bit memory prone. As you can kind of see, it's like wanting to bend itself back. And because it's a little memory prone, you can see there's still a little bit of a kink baked into it from when I first unboxed this thing about a month ago. So yeah, I don't know. It's there's certainly much worse cables that come with headphones. I think this one's decent. But if I was daily driving this headphone, I probably would be tempted to get an upgraded cable. Meze definitely has a lot of upgraded cables you can check out, but there's some other options out there as well that are not quite as expensive. But apart from that, I believe that is all that comes in the box. Well, of course, aside from the headphone itself. So let's talk about this headphone. And well, Meze just typically, pretty much every review I do of a Meze product is me gushing over their build quality and their aesthetics, and this is not going to be an exception, okay? While this is a budget version of their $800 109 Pro, in a lot of ways, I don't necessarily, like, this does not feel like a budget headphone at all. In fact, this feels like a better built headphone than, frankly, most headphones that are even much more expensive than it. The big differences are that, in terms of like obvious things that are going to make a difference in terms of cost, is that the 109 Pro had full wood cups, right? And then these cups here are made out of an ABS plastic. But it is a very nice feeling. You can maybe see in the video that it's got a light texture to it. So it's not kind of like this boring smooth plastic that's going to get smudged up. Like it feels really nice the way that they've done it. And the aesthetic, I think that they've kept up a really cool look. It's a little bit different than you got on the 109 Pro. Maybe a little bit of a, what is that, trypophobia vibes or something like that. If you've got that phobia, maybe I should have given you a warning before I flipped this headphone. But if you've got that phobia, you're probably not here anymore. So I don't know. I think it's a really cool look. And I guess a nice kind of bonus for Meze's headphones in general is that they, here, let me show you this real quick. You see, like, there are these exposed screw heads up here. And then exposed screw heads down here. Basically, this entire headphone is user serviceable, which I think is a pretty cool feature. In fact, they do a pretty good job on their website of selling a lot of spare parts. I don't see them necessarily selling drivers, so maybe you can't replace every single thing, but the common things that are going to go bad in a headphone, whether it be the headband or the ear pads, is all super easily replaceable. And I think that's actually a really cool touch. Apart from that, I think, let me just check my notes. I think we can just get into talking about the fit and comfort. I will actually briefly talk about, oh my gosh, did I not prepare myself? Please hold while I find this cable that I'm looking for. All right, actually, before we move on to the fit and comfort of this headphone, I did want to briefly talk about this alternate cable that Meze is selling. Now, it doesn't come with the headphone, but it does pair well with the headphone. This is a boom mic cable that Meze, I think, brought to market fairly recently, and they sent it along with the 105 AER, so I thought it was a pretty good opportunity to actually check it out. And here's kind of how it works. So I got the bottom, hold on, let me make sure I got the two tops. So it's still got your standard 3.5 millimeter dual entry, and this will ostensibly work with pretty much any 3.5 millimeter dual entry headphone. Meze has a ton of them, but I tested it specifically with this, and it's got a little boom microphone on it. The boom microphone is made out of metal. It feels quite nice, cold to the touch, premium, you might say. But more importantly, it actually sounds really good. So when I was playing around with this thing, I had it hooked up to the 105. I joined a video call for work, and I did not bring any attention to the fact that I was using this headphone cable. But at the end of the call, there was a couple people on the call with me that actually said, wow, your microphone sounds really good. It sounds like a podcast. So I guess that's a good review. The one thing I will note is that it is just kind of like a general, I don't know, it's not like a smart microphone, right? This is just an analog microphone. It picks up sound really good, but also it might pick up some like background sound. So this wouldn't necessarily be like a noise canceling microphone. If you're in a busy environment, noisy environment, might not be the best pick. But if you're in an office and you're on video calls like I was, frankly, this is actually pretty nice. The only downside of this cable that I'll say, and actually I'll briefly highlight this too, down at the Y split, you do have a volume control, which is kind of nice, as well as a mute switch, so you can mute the microphone. I like that. The only downside of this cable is that it is really quite long. I believe it's 8 foot long, which again, in the context of desktop PC or like even home stereo headphone cables, that's not necessarily the longest, but for me it's long enough that it's kind of annoying, and because of that, you can see I've got it kind of cinched up and shortened, but even then it ends up being a little bit clunky because of that length. I would love it if this was a 4 foot cable. In fact, if this was a 4 foot cable, there's a good chance I'd put this on, you know, whatever headphone I'm reviewing at the time and just kind of make this my go-to video conference microphone because it sounds really good. But yeah, if you want to check that out, they sell this thing separately. What is the price on it? I think it's 80 bucks, which is not bad. But anyway, let's go back to the headphone. So here we have the 105 Pro, and I guess we'll talk about fit and comfort. So let's go to my head. I'll throw it on my head and let you take a look. Just generally, as is with the build quality, the aesthetics on this headphone, the fit and comfort, fantastic, absolutely fantastic. You know, you might have noticed it's got kind of like this self-adjusting headband. I really like it when a headphone does that well. There's some headphones that don't do it very well, and if you've had experience with those headphones, you might not like this mechanism. But basically every Meze headphone that I've used that has this self-adjusting headband does it really well, and because of that, I actually like this. And this is an example of one that does it really well. It's just, it has the right amount of tension so that it's holding the headphone up, although it is a very lightweight headphone. I believe it's like 330-ish grams, so it's definitely on the lightweight side. But it holds the headphone up without pulling it up off my head. It's not applying like extra tension or anything like that. It's just generally a very comfortable place to be. In terms of clamp factor, I would say it's, you know, not the lightest of clamps, but definitely not the clampiest headphone out there. And then in terms of ear space, the pads here, let me give you a close-up on the pads. They give me tons of room for my ears. You know, this isn't like the most massive ear pads, something like the Hyphamans or even like Meze's bigger headphones have quite a bit more room in the ear, but this has got plenty of left to right and top to bottom and depth for me. And because it's not like oversized like some of those other headphones I was talking about, you're not going to have, at least most people are not going to have an issue with trying to get a seal at the bottom. Some of those larger ear cup headphones that I was just mentioning, like the Hyphamans, the ear cup is so large that sometimes like your jaw will break the seal in that you're getting with the cup. But this is just kind of like, I don't know, this to me seems like it's just about ideal in terms of size and room for your ear. So I don't know, they kind of nailed it. I just kind of love everything about the physical form factor of this headphone. I think it looks beautiful. I think it fits beautiful. I love that it is ergonomic, that it's replaceable. All that stuff is quite nice. And again, like it doesn't really feel like a downgrade from the 109 Pro. It feels like it's not made out of wood. So if you wanted the wood, I guess that it would be a downgrade. But apart from that, like it looks cool. I dig it. And I think that's about as much as I can say about this physical form factor. I apologize for the gushing, but let us talk now about the sound signature on this headphone. Let me move my headphones out of the way and we'll pull up the Squig Cam. So this is a frequency response that I've measured of this headphone on my rig. If you want to check it out, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below on SquigLink. It's SquigLink. Anyway, so this, I think, gives you a pretty good idea of what this should sound like, although there's going to be some of my subjective impressions that might differ a little bit from what you would expect. So, all right, what do we see? We see, I think, three kind of main features here that are worth calling out. Feature number one is that it does have quite a bit of bass body to it. I would say that this is not like an aggressively bassy headphone or anything like that by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have more bass than neutral. It's got a good kick to it that you're gonna get with especially like kick drums and like classic rock music and stuff like that. And it does have like a nice body and a nice heft to it from that. The other feature that you'll see here is just there's a little bit of a recession around 1.5 to 2K. And that just means that the vocals are gonna be a little bit on the thinner side. And yeah, just kind of lack a little bit of body. And then the last thing I'll call out here, and this is a thing that, you know, could be just in the measurements, could be actually heard. This is a sort of feature that, and the extremity of this feature, the strength of this feature, is within range that it could be one of those things that shows up in a graph but doesn't show up in an ear, or vice versa. I will say that it does sound a little bit bright to me here in kind of this lower treble region. And I describe this as kind of like the presence region, right? So this you'll feel really adding a lot of emphasis to transients and like guitar plucks, even like drum thwacks and stuff like that will get a little bit of extra kick in their kind of initial attack. And that sensation from this elevation here. It's also going to add a little bit of an edge and a graveliness to vocals. So depending on what kind of vocal content you're listening to, you're losing a little bit of that richness and kind of gaining a little bit of that edge. And it can have the effect of just giving it a little bit of an edginess and a slight artificiality, I suppose, to it. But then the other thing that's worth calling out here, and I think maybe it's best for me to pull up this other graph, which is of, hold on, let's make sure this works. All right, cool. So this graph that I've just overlaid on top, the red graph, is the 109 Pro. So this is the more expensive headphone I was talking about earlier. A lot in common, like I mentioned. This driver basically has all the same specs, a couple of small differences in terms of the construction of it. But as you can see, wideband, this is basically doing the same things that the 109 Pro does. But where it varies is that it seems like there's a little bit of a difference here in the lower treble and a big, big difference in the upper treble. And this difference, I actually think, is an improvement with the 105 AER. I think this headphone sounds significantly less fatiguing than the 109, which was kind of my biggest issue with that headphone. It was a fun headphone. It was a nice sound signature that's just a little bit too aggressive. And then here with the 105 AER, let me close that one off again, you're just getting a bit of a relaxation here in the upper treble, which whatever that sparkling tinklingness that I was having that was kind of annoying me with the 109 Pro, well, I don't really get it with this headphone. So that's looking good so far. All right, let me pull up my notes and we'll just kind of get through more of these subjective listening impressions, okay? Like I mentioned, I like this actually better than the 109 Pro. I find the treble to be less fatiguing, but a lot of the same characteristics that I liked about the 109 Pro are very much here. It still lacks, again, this is a similar characteristic to the 109 Pro. It does still kind of lack that richness in the mid-range, can come across a little bit clinical, maybe even a little bit prickly. Even though that upper treble is relaxed, I think that kind of new emphasis now in the lower treble is still giving it a little bit of a prickly, almost grainy characteristic to it. Almost like it sounds, I don't know if you've ever seen like an old Samsung phone photo where it's just like a little bit over sharpened. You get a little bit of that effect here. But the plus side, and again, this is very much similar to the 109 Pro, is just the stereo separation on this headphone is really, really good, especially at the price range of $400. You just get really good sense of stereo separation, that separation between sounds, the positioning of everything, just generally really nice imaging. And I think that the bass depth on this thing is also very, very satisfying. You know, it does have some nice physicality to the kick drums. I like that a lot. And it, you know, doesn't really come across as like bloomy or thick or bloated or anything like that. I don't know how much of that has to do with kind of that suck out in the mid-range that I talked about earlier, like in that 1.5 to 2K range. It's pulling a little bit back from the body, and I think it's giving that bass a little bit more leeway to be more forward and still give it kind of that contrasty V-shaped sound signature that this headphone does. But yeah, it does that bass, it does that stereo separation, it does those two quite well. Yeah, I don't know, just generally those are kind of the good things and bad things about this headphone. But let me put it into context by making room on my table and bringing in a couple of other headphones for comparison. So this first one that we're going to talk about, let me flip it around this side so you can take a look at it. It's a Sony. This is a Sony MDR-MV1, also an open back dynamic driver headphone. This one came out, I want to say a couple of years ago. Price range on this, when it first came out, was $400. I have a feeling you could probably get it cheaper nowadays, but let's assume this is a $400 headphone. Now, in terms of physical form factor, build quality, and stuff like that, they do different approaches. This one definitely feels cheaper. It feels lighter weight, a little flimsier. But also because of that, like, it might be a good thing. And hear me out. There's definitely more plastic on this, whereas I didn't really talk about this. Apart from the ear cups being made out of ABS, these are all just like premium materials on this thing. This thing definitely has a lot more plastic in the headband. The outer cups are made out of a metal of some sort, and it's well padded up here. But mostly this thing's just kind of optimized for weight. This is a very lightweight headphone that you could ostensibly wear all day. And while the 105 AER is also a very lightweight headphone, this is even lighter. I should have actually looked up the specs, but I don't have them right now. I'm guessing this is around the 250 gram range. So a very lightweight headphone. Apart from that, you know, the ear cups don't give you quite as much space for the ears, but generally I find it to be perfectly fine. They're very plush, very soft ear pads. You know, maybe one difference to highlight is that the AER uses kind of like a velour, and this is also a velour of sorts, but it's a little closer to a suede terms of feel. So this is might give you a little bit more of a prickliness over time, Although to be honest, I found these to be both quite comfortable. But if we're just talking in terms of softness and lightness on the head, as good as the AER is, I would say that the MV1 is even a step better than that. But let's talk about the sound, because these headphones are interesting in that, well, they're both open back dynamic driver headphones, both $400, and they both do bass a lot better than dynamic drivers are typically known for doing, okay? This guy's got a good amount of bass emphasis to it, and this one right here, I think has even more bass emphasis to it. So if you're looking for the bassier headphone, I think that's gonna be the Sony. Neither of these necessarily like sound thick and overbearing and bloated in their bass. They're both pretty well done, but this one will sound, especially in like the sub bass region, I think better extended and just kind of deeper and rumblier, whereas maybe you get a little bit tighter of a kick impact on the 105. Anything else I want to talk about? Okay, I mean, just overall, like, the treble characteristics that I described in this headphone, I really don't get on this guy. If you look at the frequency response graph, you will kind of notice that this one looks very bright. The MV1 looks like it has this like massive, scary peak in the treble, but I really don't hear it to my ear. In fact, earlier this morning, I was doing some treble or some sine sweeps with this headphone on my head, and I could hear it peak at around 8K hertz, but that was about it. And apart from that, generally just seemed like a pretty well balanced tune up top. It can sound a little bit on the thinner side in kind of like the vocal region. Again, it's not kind of that rich vocal presence that I really like to hear. And overall, I would say that this is definitely the less like stagey sound signature. This is a little bit on the stodgy side in terms of its tonal balance. Yeah, just much less stereo separation. It's less incisive, less sharp. And because of that, I think that's a little bit more comfortable to listen to over the long terms, but it's also probably a little bit less engaging. If I was picking between these two headphones in terms of sound signature and what I want to listen to, like, this is the one that's going to be the most impressive. The AER is going to be the one that immediately, like, it's like, oh yeah, that's doing the good stuff. But after about like 20-30 minutes of listening to it, this one is going to be the one that just kind of feels more comfortable, and I'm going to want to listen to more over the long term. So I feel like they trade blows in certain ways. Some people are definitely going to prefer one over the other. My personal pick would still probably be the Sony, but that's going to bring us to one other headphone. And this one, if you're looking for bass, is probably definitely not going to be the bassy one for you. But this is the Sennheiser HD600. And I bring this one in because it's also a dynamic driver, also around $400. And it just happens to be one of my favorite headphones of all time. Now, the sound on this guy is quite a bit different from both of those others in that this is very much a mid-range focused sound signature. So if you're looking for a lot of that richness in the vocal content that I said that both this and even the Sony are lacking, this is the headphone that's doing that thing that I like. If you want to know the difference, this is the difference. Listen to these things back to back, and you're just going to hear a lot more body, richness, and just kind of texture and this kind of like micro contrast in the mid-range that this Sennheiser frankly just does really well. Now, the downside or the trade-off is that there's just not as much bass. I would still say that the bass is like fairly punchy on this headphone. It's just not going to dig very deep and give you that rumbliness. Whereas this, does have some roll off in the bass. It's not nearly as much as what you get here on the Sennheiser. As far as that tonal balance goes, I think that I would say that this gives you more clarity versus the MV1, right? Versus the Sony, but not quite as much clarity as you get here on the AER. And then I think the trade-off of having that nice balance is that you get that sense of clarity without any of the fatigue. This is just, again, a very comfortable headphone I can listen to for hours. The stereo imaging on this set, I would say, is sufficient. It's a little bit better than the Sony. Not quite as standout, not nearly as standout as the Meze, but it's at the point where I'm not gonna complain about it. I think that the stereo imaging on this thing is certainly sufficient, if not impressive. So it shouldn't surprise you. This is still my personal pick at this price range. But if you're looking for something that's more exciting and bassy, well, that's not what this is going to be. And the Meze 105 AER might be it, which I think is going to lead us into wrapping up this review. All right. How do we rate this thing? It's got, like Meze typically does, just a home run build quality at half the price of their last home run build quality headphone. In fact, I think this thing is better than the $800 headphone at just $400. I do still think that it's a little bit limited in terms of my, desire to continue listening to this thing for extended period of times. Because of that aggressive tune, it can be a little bit fatiguing, a little bit sharp, and it's just not quite as laid back and pleasant as I suppose I tend to prefer. Out of 5 stars, I'm going to give the Meze 105 AER a solid 3 stars. If you're looking for something that's more exciting, more punchy, gives you kind of that staginess, this is definitely not a bad headphone to pick. I think I'm actually kind of impressed they got the price down to this point, and if you want to check it out, well, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the pitch, we take it like this. I put this in the game, I'm up for feeling rich. Me, you say, I'm being